When did I start to forget all of the great things you did? When did I throw away faith for the impossible, to the impossible? And how did I start to believe that you weren't sufficient for me? Why do I talk myself out of seeing miracles, do miracles? You are more than able. 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 Who am I to deny what the Lord can do? And now I see all that I have, and I've got my confidence back. I put my trust in the one who still does miracles. You do miracles. You are more than able. 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 Who am I to deny what the Lord can do? Can you imagine, with all of the faith in the room, what the Lord can do? What the Lord can do? It's gonna happen. Just let the way maker through. He's gonna move. He's gonna move. Can you imagine, with all of the faith in the room, what the Lord can do? What the Lord can do? It's gonna happen. Just let the way maker through. He's gonna move. He's gonna move. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. Who am I to deny what the Lord can do? Anything is possible. Anything is possible. Anything is possible. Who am I to deny what the Lord can do? Who am I to deny what the Lord can do? Who am I to deny what the Lord can do?
Hi, welcome to Holy Week. My name is Rik Maxedon, and I'm going to be reading to you guys and giving a couple of thoughts from Genesis 18, starting in verse 9. It's the story of Sarah and Abraham and the birth of their son Isaac. In verse 9, it says, "They said to him, 'Sarah, where's your wife?' And he said, 'She is in the tent.' The Lord said, 'I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son.' And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and advanced in years. the way women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid, saying, no, he said, but you did laugh. So there's two thoughts that I really have from this passage. The first one at the beginning in verse 10, first of all, the main thought here is doubt does not change God's plan. As we walk through this Holy Week, I want you to understand that any doubts that you might have doesn't change the plan that God has for you. In verse 10 here, God promises Sarah and Abraham a son. And then in verse 12, Sarah doubts that promise with a laugh and says, I'm worn out and I'm old. And then in verse 15, she even goes so far as to try to hide her doubt. And it says, but Sarah denied it. But at the end of the story, despite Sarah's doubt, despite Sarah trying to cover up her doubt, God delivers a son in Isaac. I want to say to us that Sarah's response and our response to God doesn't change God's plan. He made a promise to Sarah and Abraham, and he fulfills that promise. He does that because he's the hero of the story. He does that because he's the God of the impossible, as we're talking about throughout this Holy Week. God is the God of the impossible. And one of the wonders of Easter is that God accomplishes what he intends to accomplish in spite of a difficult situation. In fact, in my experience, it's in those, God orchestrates events to put us into difficult situations so that we might begin to look to him as our only hope. Wherever you find yourself today, sometimes you might find yourself in a difficult situation, but I want us to understand, even in my own heart, I want my own heart to understand that it's the mercy of God that places us in these difficult situations, because that teaches us to look to him as our only hope, as our only Savior. And that brings us to what I believe is the heart of this passage. Verse 14 says, is anything too hard for the Lord? I found this word this week, hard. Is anything too hard for the Lord? That Hebrew word hard is the Hebrew word palah, and it's used 70 times in the scriptures, once here in Genesis 18:14, but it's used mostly in the Psalms and in verse 29 times actually in the Psalms. And it means to be extraordinary, to be wondrous, to be miraculous. So I want to say that again slowly because I think it's really important. In verse 14, is anything too hard for the Lord? Really is saying to us, is anything too extraordinary, too miraculous, too wondrous for the Lord? So I want to read 3 Psalms with us together as we think about this idea. Is anything too extraordinary, wondrous, or miraculous for the Lord? In Psalm 9, verse 1, our palah word shows up. It says, I will give thanks to the Lord with all my heart. I will tell of your wondrous, miraculous deeds. Psalm 26:7 says, proclaiming thanksgiving aloud and telling of all your wondrous or miraculous deeds. And then lastly, I think the coolest one here is verse 78:11. They forgot his works and the wonders and miraculous things that he had shown them. I want you to think through that. We tend, when we're in difficult situations, when we're in impossible situations, just like Sarah was, and where we find ourselves consistently, when we're in impossible situations, God has orchestrated events to get us to look to him as the one who does these hard things. There's nothing too hard, too wonderful, too miraculous for God. I want to say this as we kind of close up this time together. God could have given a son to Abraham and Sarah any time that he wanted to. But why did he choose to give one to Sarah and Abraham at the end of their lives when they were very old and worn out, as Sarah says? Maybe it's to show us that he's the God of the impossible. Maybe it's to show us that he is the true hero of the story. God is working around us to do marvelous, wonderful, and miraculous things. He is constantly teaching us to look to Him as His Savior. He's teaching us that there's nothing too wonderful, nothing too hard, nothing too miraculous for Him to accomplish in my life and in your life. He's instilling faith in you and I. He's teaching us that as we encounter impossible situations, as we may encounter as we think about Holy Week this week, we might think about these opportunities where we would pray that God might show us and give us an encounter with the God of the impossible, and that we might see our faith strengthened. Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about Jesus, visit us on our website at refreshcommunity.church. You can click on the Jesus tab there to learn more about who Christ is.